Now for something really completely different. Completely different completely. Welcome back to my shop and the channel. And I think I mentioned in the past that my wife and I do living history. Scottish Highlanders, 1745, Jacobite Rebellion to be specific. Link in the description. As part of my impression, I wanted to carry a musket because there was a lot of muskets used during the rebellion. The musket I needed, 1717 or 1728 pattern French, were not available. You could not buy them. You could buy the parts from different part manufacturers and assemble it yourself, but you couldn't buy the assembled musket anywhere. And this is one of those muskets. This is the 28 pattern French Charleville Infantry Musket. Like I said, all the hard parts and stock and the barrel can be bought from different manufacturers. So I did that, and I put two of these together for a friend of mine and myself. So take a look at this quick little slideshow of me putting the gun together before I had a video camera. Just a few slides of parts and what they look like before, what they look like after, and the shop as it looked back then. I also had darker hair and long hair. Anyway, take a look. There are plenty of more photographs. Yeah, I didn't have a video back then, and I wasn't on YouTube. But flash forward to today, and you can now buy French infantry muskets from that period that are functional. This is one of those. One of our members bought this, and it's a nice piece. A little different than what I made. These parts, a lot of my parts are cast from originals. These are manufactured somewhere elsewhere, don't know. But it broke. And I'll explain more in detail in a little bit. But the part that you put your finger on in the trigger broke off the trigger because it was two pieces instead of one cast piece. The parts for mine were cast in one piece. The trigger was cast in one piece. This was a put together piece, and I need to reattach that trigger part to this piece. So first thing to do is get the lock off of the piece. So let's take the lock off. So you and I are going into this piece for the very first time. I've never taken one of these apart, so I don't know how the lock is set up on the other side. But the first thing you do is just two screws that hold the lock in place. And the lock plate will stay, this back piece will stay in the gun. It's inlet into the wood, obviously. That's kind of loose. Now let's see if this pops out. There we go. The lock is out, and this is the lock. Oops, this is the lock, and I don't have to do anything with this. I have the springs and everything, spring compressors and all that to take this apart. What I need to do is remove the trigger. So I wanted the lock out so I could see how the mechanism works, and it's basically identical to mine, just a little coarser, but it works. So the next thing to do is to take off the trigger guard and get the trigger out. Again, there's a couple of screws, and in mine, there's a screw. This screw here at the tang goes all the way through to the trigger plate, and so I take the trigger guard off and then take this screw out, and that should be it. So let's take. Most of these wood screws here, like mine, some of the screws that look like antique screws in mine, I just took Home Depot screws and modified the heads of them to look like period screws. And that worked out really well. Now sometimes this screw for the tang goes all the way through to the trigger guard. We'll find that out in a second. Yep, it does. So I'm going to take the tang screw out, which will be a machine screw. Big, longer machine screw. Why is this not coming out? Oh my. Oh my. It looks like it's pinned in place. And I am going to have some problems. I'll have to see how far I have to go into this now. So it looks like they pinned it in place as well. So I've got to knock this pin enough through so I can get it from the other side. And there it is. So I got that one out. That pin, and that gets the trigger guard out of the way. And then the trigger mechanism. And that's the part. That's the part I need to put the new part on, or the old part back on. This is the trigger part that needs to go back on here, just like that. And then it needs to be cleaned up. Oops, get it in camera. It's going to go back on just like that, like so. And that needs to be silver soldered in place, which I'm going to do, I hope. But it needs to be cleaned up dramatically because silver solder needs to have a very clean surface to work with, even with the flux. By the way, the pins they put in there are basically freaking nails, just nails. You know, in the day they used actual pieces of wire pin, cut to length, and then inserted into where it needed to go. But that's the offending broken part that I have to repair right there. Jumping ahead a little bit, what I've done is I've cleaned all the metal parts pretty well, and I have jam fit the trigger face onto the trigger plate. And I'm going to be using high force 44 solder, which is a gunsmithing solder. It has a low melt temperature but a very high shear strength. The bayonet lug on my musket is soldered on with that, and I've never had a problem with that, putting on the bayonet and taking it off. So the next, I've got propane to do this with and some flux. And so now I'm going to set this up so I can go ahead and solder this piece in place, let it cool, and then clean it up. Okay, so let's give this a try. I haven't done this in a while. If it blows up on me, I'll have to start all over again. But I've got it fluxed, and now I have to go ahead and start the process by getting the flux to melt and flow, and then dip in the solder. Okay, we'll let that cool down and see if it took. Well, there it is. You can kind of see the solder. I've got a good contact and flow on the trigger face and on the trigger itself. It doesn't look very good. It's kind of ugly and nasty looking. So I've got to clean this up now and make it, the parts that are shown have got to look like they're supposed to be shiny. Yeah, I got to go out there with some power tools. Anyhow, so let me clean this up, and then we can go and reassemble the musket. Trigger face clean, nice and smooth, ready to go back into the gun, very firmly attached to the trigger plate itself. So now it's time to put this thing together again. And yeah, okay. Time to put it back together. Let's just do this close up so you can see what's going on. Time to assemble this bad boy. Kinda. All right, what I want to do is get the trigger plate in there and get the hole lined up. By the way, see? Nice and clean, nice and shiny. This kind of is a little bit tricky to get in here because it's got a weird angle on it. But what I want to do is put it in and then get the hole lined up. Will it line up? There it is. There. So the trigger is in place and it's functioning as it should be. Of course, there's no sear to stop it, so there's that. Then the next thing is we're going to put the lock back in place. No, we're going to put the trigger guard back in place. Yeah, let's do that because that requires a pin as well. Trigger guard kind of slips right into the inletting. And then another pin. Oop, come on. Don't mess with me. Think I got it. There it is. Okay, trigger guard is in place. Let's put the wood screws in. The probably Home Depot screws are very similar to it, that were reshaped to look like old screws. It's real easy to do. And to get the CAD plating off, we usually use vinegar. Soak them in vinegar to kind of discolor and remove the CAD plating or whatever it does to it. Makes it looks it dark. And of course I'm going to clock the screws because that's what you do, meaning they're going to line up with the stock. There we go. Making kinds of noise here. And that's clocked. So the trigger guard is in place. And now we're just going to slip the lock in. Make sure, oh, that's got to go down a little further. There we go. Make sure you get the pins all the way in. And the lock is going to slip into place. This is the sear by the way. I'll pull my lock out and go into more detail on how this mechanism works. So slip this in place like so. Now this is at half cock. Typically you take it out when it's at half cock. Get these started. I don't know if I can clock these, but I can give it a try. That's clocked. Oops, not quite. There we go. That's clocked. So that's nice and tight. So it's reassembled. Let's test it. As I said at the bench, it's at half cock. That's full cock. Now I have to see if the trigger's going to work. Yep, it works. I don't know if you saw the spark. But anyhow, not really happy about this trigger assembly. This is a weak point in this particular piece. I mean, it's in there where it's supposed to go. So let me take the lock out of mine and go into a little more detail on how a flintlock actually works. So this is the internal workings of a flintlock. The joke is that, this is the one ignition system from that period, early periods of firearms, we can actually attribute to an individual. I can't remember his name, but it was a French gunsmith in 1616. Came up with this idea, taking all the external parts and putting them on the inside. And the joke is it was adopted worldwide in 20 minutes because it's easier to manufacture, it's easier to keep clean and maintain, and it's easier to train people how to use it. So let's start with the mainspring. This is the mainspring right here. That's what gives all the action it needs to take the cock from here down onto the frizzen. More on that later. This plate, I'm not going to take it all apart, but this plate here covers the tumbler. This little kind of half moon shape in here you can see, barely. Bring it up close to the camera. This little half moon thing is called the tumbler. There's two steps on the tumbler. One is for half cock, which locks the cock in a position so it can't go off accidentally. And the full cock position is right there. That little notch. That little notch right there, that's full cock. And that allows the sear to pop off of there when you pull the trigger. This is the sear. That's what starts all the action. So when I bring this back to half cock, watch the sear goes cold. See if you can see it in there? That little notch in the tumbler, it comes into this little space right there. And it's an actual notch in the tumbler that locks the cock in place so it can't move. And that's, like I said, that's where the "don't go off half-cocked" saying comes from. So this is when you go through the whole loading process when it's in half-cock. This piece here is called the frizzen, or battery. This is where you create the sparks. This is a piece of flintlock, obviously. And the flint strikes the frizzen, creating sparks, which lights powder that's in the pan right here. And that flame goes into the barrel through the touch hole. I'm going to bring the barrel over and show you the touch hole. There's the touch hole. That ignites the powder inside the barrel. Flash in the pan. When the pan goes off, but nothing happens. That's where that comes from. So now all that stuff's done. It's loaded. It's ready to go. There's powder in the pan. Now you go back to full cock. And now you can actually fire it. So when the trigger comes up, the trigger plate comes up, it pushes on the sear right here. Get my finger out of the way. And it goes off. Go back to that again. You can see the sparks. I'll push the sear up. Oops. That's my mistake. I'll push the sear up. Caught my finger. One more. And that's what fires a flintlock. The only tool you really need to take this apart, other than the screwdriver, is a spring compressor, a period style spring compressor, which I have, that allows you to compress this spring off of the tumbler here, take that screw out, and the spring comes out. So that's basically it. That's a flintlock and how it works, kinda. It's more fun to take to the range and fire it. So I thought I'd give you just a quick demo on what the safety or half-cock position is like with a flintlock. So I'm going to go to half-cock right now. This gun weighs about 9.5 pounds, and I'm now hanging the 9.5-pound musket off my finger. And the cock is remaining in the same position, half-cock position, is not moving. This is when you load the weapon. You load it in the half-cock position, so you don't do something stupid or dangerous. Then once you're done, again, go to full cock, and you get the spark. So, thus ends the something different, totally different thing that I did for this week. So next time, make great things out of wood, unlike what I did this time, which is not making anything out of wood.